All right, that's going. All right, I'm showing 1:30. Does that look right? Okay, let us commence. First coffee, of course, because nothing's more important than that. If you look at the Moodle page, and you really should, um, we've got this assignment coming up that is tomorrow, okay? And the way this works, it's a little different from what you might be used to, partly because of the remote delivery of the class, but also because I'm trying to figure out ways where you can be, for want of a better word, tested on the material, but in a relatively low pressure environment, right? So, you do it when you want to. Sometime during tomorrow, it goes online at 7 in the morning, um, and it'll be available until 11 at night. Okay, so that's plenty of time. Okay, but what you do is once you begin the assignment and start filling things out, um, you only have 2 hours. Now, the reason why I came up with that time frame is um, I get students in every class every term who have some sort of accommodation contract with the campus. Okay, that it might be a test anxiety issue or something like that, whatever it is. I very seldom look at that. I figure if, a DSS or whoever says, give this person an accommodation, I'm going to give you an accommodation. So what I'm doing instead is just figuring, all right, well, let's just build that into the assignment. This is an assignment that when I've had students do it in class, the average completion time is about 30 minutes. So rather than worry about whether any one or two or more of you have an accommodation that I might not be aware of at some given time, I just quadrupled the time available. So everyone should have plenty of time to do this. Obviously, if you really hit the wall on it, and if you are, have already been deemed eligible for some sort of accommodation, we can talk about that. If the first assignment doesn't work in that format for you, for some reason, we might have to make an adjustment. I've never had that happen, but that isn't to say that it can't. And if we need to do that, then I want to do that. The main thing is I want to try and create circumstances where you feel like you're in the proper frame of mind to give me what for you is your best effort. And I don't believe that people's best effort is given under pressure with a ticking clock. But 2 hours on this assignment isn't much of a ticking clock when you consider any notes you've made in class you can use. The notes that I gave you that are posted on the Moodle site, you can use, okay? Please don't just cut and paste. I mean, I want you to be able to explain these things to me, these various concepts, and show me that you understand them, okay? The easiest way to deal with the quiz, and we'll review the basic concepts in a second here. This may not be a very long class, that's okay. Is first take a couple of sentences minimum. Now, some of these things say, you'll notice there, it'll say, well, it's somewhere between a paragraph or two. That's the maximum you're going to need to do. If you really know your stuff, you should be able to do these assignments and do well on them with, say, 3 sentences, okay? Maybe 4, depending on how elaborate your example is. And here's the way I would recommend that you do it. In at least one, syntactically coherent, grammatically solid, concise sentence, give me your understanding of how we can define this term with respect to this class. Do not, okay, make note of this. Do not use a dictionary definition. Okay, now I'm going to make this real clear, okay? Because I think pretty much everybody enrolled in this class is here. A dictionary definition will not count as credit. So if you give me a dictionary definition, and I'll know if you have because I can check it online, because none of you is going to look at a physical dictionary, okay? If you do that, all right, and it's just a dictionary definition, I'm going to disallow it and I'm not going to count it as points. So I'm going to figure that part of the question was not answered. I'm not doing that to be difficult. I'm doing that because, as I've tried to demonstrate with some of these concepts, this isn't the way these terms are always generally or typically used. And also because accepted use of a term is often incorrect when you try to apply that concept or term to the analysis of something complex, okay? So when you're defining these things, you've got an easy source for that. Make reference to the notes. Every one of the concepts we've introduced in here. is covered in the notes, where I say, well, we could think of it this way, and I give a kind of definition. Then I usually, by way of clarifying, they're trying to clarify it with my dense brain, I will try and give you examples of how you could apply that concept to something that we've all seen, okay? So that, for example, when we talk about institutions, I can explain institutions as these recurring patterns of behavior and all the things that I include in definition. But that's really not enough, okay? If I were to explain that to someone who wasn't in this class, that wouldn't be sufficient. I'd have to give them examples, okay? So I'd say, give me at least one example, because what you're doing is, by using examples, you're showing me that you understand how to apply this abstract concept to something that you can see as tangible and specific, okay? You are going to do better on the assignment if, when you use examples, they are not the examples that we cover in class, okay? Because what you're showing me is, I don't need to fall back on just the stuff that you said. I can use my own example and show you how this works, okay? You're showing me a level of confidence that you have in how to apply these concepts and use them to have better understanding of, political phenomena, okay? So far, does this make sense, what I'm going to be asking you to do on the assignment? Do you have any questions about the assignment? I can't completely give it away, but I doubt that you're going to be surprised when you look at it. I can tell you in terms of format, there are 4 separate areas where you need to apply some notion of definition and explanation. 4 different things, okay? They are clearly related. I've tried to construct the assignment itself so that looking at any one of the things I'm asking you about might trigger a train of thought in terms of your ability to respond to any of the other concepts, because the key here is not just remembering these concepts in isolation, but beginning to connect them together into some model that you can use to explain politics, okay? So for each of those, I'm going to ask you, tell me what this is and how is it useful in studying politics, okay? So I have tried to make it as straightforward as possible, because that is the best way to find out what's on your minds. I don't believe in trick questions or, nonsense like that, okay? I don't think that's teaching. I think that's being snarky and foolish. And I'm not really into that. I guess I'm old school, or maybe not. Maybe that used to be old school. I don't know. I think it's stupid. How about that? There's a word I very seldom use. It's a stupid thing to do. And those of my colleagues who do it are lucky that I don't know, because I probably embarrass them in public if I knew. And I'm pretty good at that. I can embarrass people in public without laying a hand on them, because I'm too old to do that now. Damn it. It would be so much easier if you could just go and pop people and they'd fall down, and then you could get arrested and you could go write your prison diaries and avoid taking showers alone and things like that. I don't know, whatever. But there you go. That's not the world we live in today. All right. So again, any questions on the assignment? It becomes available tomorrow morning at 7, and anytime between then and about 9 o'clock, you can drop in and begin the assignment, because at 11, it shuts down, okay? If it works. Sometimes those things don't quite work. We'll see. But, your time frame is 2 hours. So what I would suggest that you do, of course, on this and any other assignment like this, that's structured like this, I would pre-write my answers. I would try and guess, just like we did when I was in graduate school. We had to have, just by way of comparison, when I was finishing my doctorate, we had 3 exams in 3 fields. All right, you had your primary field, your secondary field, and then you had some other field, like a cognate field or something, okay? For each of those, you were locked up in an office alone with no notes, no nothing, for 5 hours, and expected to write fluently about whatever, whatever. And I mean, you had to cite sources. You had to remember enough to know, not only understand what the concepts were, but know which author or authors had developed those, in which publication, in which year, okay? So I hated it, okay? But the thing is, when I walked out of those exams, I knew more about the state of the art and the discipline then than at any other time that I was around. Now, it doesn't mean I knew more about politics. I knew more about political science, okay? I'm not asking you to do that, okay? I'm not asking you to do anything like that. You can take your notes in, you can do whatever, that's fine. I just want to make sure that your head's clear, you're not feeling too anxious, and you can just sit down and lean into the assignment and give me your best responses. All right. So it really shouldn't be, it should be challenging for you. It should give you, you should have to stop and think a little bit. But we used to game it. We used to look at old questions that had been asked on previous exams. They would let us look at those. So here are all the exams that were given in comparative politics at the PhD level, University of California, Davis, okay? And we'd sit there and we'd study together, and if we could answer all those questions, we knew that our professors were not smarter than us. They might know more, but they weren't smarter, and they weren't going to be able to trick us. And it worked like a charm. And we all nailed our exams, and it was really great. And so this is much easier than that, okay? But it will allow me to see, okay, are they getting, as a group, are they getting these concepts, or do I need to back up and review a little bit more? Should we slow down, or can we move on to the next stuff? That's the primary thing I'm doing. Each of the 4 things you do, it's 10 points, some fraction of 10 points. Makes it nice and easy for me to calculate an answer. 9 out of 10 is an A, 10 out of 10 is a really snappy A, 8 out of 10 is a B, and so on, okay? I would write out some notes at the very least before I opened up the quiz and started working, okay?
So these are all concepts that we've covered like in the notes for module 1 and all that.
Everything on there is stuff that not only is it in the notes, but we've already talked about it in considerable depth in class.
Right.
Otherwise, that would be unfair. Now, I've had professors who've done exactly what you're implying. That is, they'll go in and they'll reel off these lectures and try to sound all brilliant and everything that have nothing to do with the assigned readings. And then you'll get their exams. They're all based on the assigned readings. None of them have anything to do with what we've been talking about. Okay, so I know from experience, I can tell you that the first political science class I took at University of California, no, I'm sorry, Cal State Chico, was Political Science 101. It was Intro Political Science. On the first assignment, if there was no curve, I'd have gotten a C. I've never gotten a C on anything in my life. Okay, but this guy was an idiot. He had given up on the idea that he had to do anything other than walk into a lecture hall, spew for a while, sound smart, drink coffee, and walk out with a paycheck. And everything else was just automatic. All of his test questions and everything were taken from the publishers of the book and everything else. And it was the biggest waste of time I'd ever had. And it almost convinced me not to go into political science. So I've obviously learned from that, do not do this. People will hate it. I don't care if you hate me, but I don't want you to hate the work. I'd like you to find the work at least mildly interesting. So no, I'm trying to avoid that. All right, if there are no more specific sort of technical questions for as long as we need to today, I thought I would just very quickly give you a kind of flyover review of the things that we've covered and how they kind of fit together. And I'm not necessarily going to follow the same order in which we covered them before or in the same order that they're covered on the notes, okay? Because for one thing, I'm not working from notes because I hate doing that. All right, let's start with, what appears to be the key subject matter of the course, politics. So when we talk about politics, okay, the main thing we're talking about with politics, don't say something like, politics is 2 parties running for election. No, it's not. It's not. Because there's nothing about governance in there. There's nothing about the creation of law. There's nothing about public-private relationships. There's nothing about any of the institutions of politics in that. Okay. When people in the news talk about politics, or they say, oh, this is nothing but politics, what they are really saying is this is nothing but partisanship. Okay. When this republic was created, there were no political parties in the electorate, and there were what were called legislative factions in the early legislatures. There might be federalists and anti-federalists or something like that, okay? But there was nothing like modern political parties that existed in the American Republic at that time, which is why things like the Electoral College were clearly designed to keep the American people from choosing the president, okay? It was supposed to be the elites of each state doing that, okay? Well, those institutions have changed. But more importantly, the way that we govern has changed. The size and scope and authority of the central state has changed. The roles that have been taken on by national, state, and local government have changed. There are far more laws on the books, criminalizing things that used to be either punished locally or not at all. That's a significant change. All of those are a consequence of what we ought to be referring to as politics. And in that, what we're looking at is the process through which public decisions are made, okay? Not private decisions. So when people talk about, metaphorically, they talk about personal politics or, well, that's corporate politics, okay? The thing about those things is within their world, yeah, they have the same impact, but they only affect people who are specifically in that world, right? If you're in a relationship with your significant other or your family or something like that, there might be a dynamics there that you refer to as family politics or personal politics. It might be for you. It doesn't affect me at all. It's not generalizable to the public. So it's not public decision making. Okay. So in the sense that we're studying politics here, it's not politics. Okay. I don't mean you can't use the term, personal politics or, family politics or whatever, corporate politics. It's just, it doesn't work here. It doesn't apply here. Okay. So there are processes of decision making. There are processes of interest expression, people being able to varying degrees or not at all to express their interests, their needs, their desires, their grievances. And then there are institutions that are created as part of that decision-making process that are supposed to respond to those desires and interests and everything that's been expressed in some way that's coherent and can create the possibility of governance. That's usually a legislature. We don't have, like the United States has never had a monarch. There are not any exclusive monarchs of any size that don't have a legislature. So usually in the modern sense, institutionally, we're talking about a legislature. Okay. There's the purpose of a legislature is to respond in some way to either the actual expressed or perceived desires of the people, all right, by producing outcomes in the form of policy. Okay. So we're making decisions that are publicly significant. The general public is bound by these decisions. If we change tax law, that's going to affect all of us who pay taxes. If we change the amount of money that we allocate to defense spending as opposed to social welfare, for example, that's going to affect an entire society. It's going to change the way that society functions. And it can be in an extraordinarily significant way. Okay. Only public decision-making can do that. If a private company decides it's not going to pay its workers minimum wage, that's going to be litigated publicly. Okay. But in the immediate sense, it doesn't affect us if we're not an employee of that company. It can affect us indirectly, but not in any significant way. My job and what I'm paid is not directly impacted by what Amazon pays its factory workers. Now, there might be a political concern that I have with respect to what Amazon pays its factory workers. I might not like that. So as a consequence of that, I might choose a public remedy for that. In other words, rather than just deciding, well, I'm not going to buy anything from Amazon or, Walmart or whatever, any big retail chain. Rather than just doing that as a private act, I might want to politicize it. That is, I might want to go for a public remedy. So what I might try to do is organize a public boycott. That includes information and organized demonstrations and an integrated, coordinated boycott of Amazon that somehow can be made verifiable and demonstrated to people such that it might pressure Amazon into changing its policies. So what I'm looking for is a public decision to be made. Ultimately, the government's going to step in because we have employment laws, we have minimum wage laws, we have a legal structure that impacts every private retail outlet, every manufacturer, every business, okay? We have this, what's called the regulatory state. Well, if I choose my remedy by appealing to the regulatory state, I have just become political in the public sense. You see what I'm saying? Because the remedy that I choose for Amazon is going to apply generalizable to every retailer. That's the way law is made. Law is not supposed to target any individual or entity. It's supposed to be generalizable to the public. The one area in which everyone is allegedly supposed to be equal, and the only one, by the way, is under the law. In every other way, inequality is accepted, particularly in the United States. Okay? Are there any questions then on what we mean when we're in here by politics? Okay? All right, the other one we started with, an important one, is this notion of institutions. Okay, now institutions Somebody give me an idea. Okay, it's quiz time now, and you have to put up with this. You got to write this down for your right answer in your quiz, and you want an A. Give me an A definition of institutions. You don't need to give me an example. Tell me what they are. Hurry, because my coffee's getting cold. If you can't, then I'm going to have to fail all of you. And then I don't have quizzes to grade. And wouldn't that be great? What if I could do that? But I can't. Why can't I? Really, I can't. What's constraining me from doing that? Institutional accountability. In other words, I have a contract with you, right? We have an agreement as part of the institution of education and the institution of this classroom, where I've said, okay, I just told you, you're going to get a chance for this assignment. It's going to show me what you understand. Now, all of a sudden, I'm going to come and say, oh, well, you didn't give me the answer I want, so forget it. I'm going to fail all of you. Explain that to me in institutional terms.
It's an agreed upon set of like behaviors or patterns.
And what's the purpose of those patterns? The nature of it is what you just described. And the nature of it is, well, you're going to do a lecture or lead a discussion, and then you're going to give us some assignments, and you're going to answer our questions, and then you're going to ask us to do some quizzes or something like that. That's the nature of it. That's why we do it. What's the function of this institution?
Well, like the example that you give in the notes with driving on a certain side of the road.
That's the nature. And that's what it looks like. What's the function of the classroom etiquette of higher education? What is it for?
Accountability.
Well, again,
safety.
I'm not teaching accountability. What is the purpose for which we created education as an institution? Why did we do it? No, I can't make you think. Education actually can't make you think. Nothing can make you think. I can't make you think. And in fact, a lot of education doesn't require a lot of thought. If you've got really good short-term memory, you can probably pull pretty good grades. But that's not really the purpose for which particularly higher education was created. Now, Owen's correct in terms of looking at the nature of these institutions. Well, the architecture of these behaviors looks like this. And when we see that, we know, oh, that's a traffic law, or oh, that's how college education looks when you see it in action. But what's the function of it? What's its purpose? Because remember, institutions, tell me the nature of it. Here's what it looks like. Here's how you recognize the behavior. Here's what it looks like. Here's its function. Here's why we created it. Why did we create? I'm sorry, I stepped on somebody. Go ahead. Oh, Bia, yeah, go ahead.
Is it to progress society in a certain way? Like we have higher education to make sure that people have jobs and to keep our economy going, all this stuff, to kind of keep the country going?
Well, we created higher education for more than just training people to make money, but it is an important component of it. One of the reasons, for example, why we expanded the availability of college education, at least until recently, in the United States was that after the Second World War, and with the full mobilization of the American industrial economy, we found that we didn't just need assembly line workers, that we needed people who could supervise them. We needed, middle managers, and we needed somebody who could be, the foreman of a factory floor or whatever. That takes more skill. It takes more insight. It takes more education. And so as a consequence of that, after the Second World War, we created a number of financial incentives and offsets to subsidize people's higher education. And we were doing it in part because we felt like, well, particularly with the GI Bill, you men and women, mostly men in combat, but women in other roles as well, you put your lives on the line, you put your careers on hold and everything else so that you could go to these far-flung parts of the world and, fight fascism and all that. We owe you something. But it was also, as Bia suggests, it was the economy needed those people. It needed that an expansion of that level of skill and ability, because that allowed the economy to expand. It allowed the middle class as a social stabilizer to expand dramatically. Okay, higher education's an important function of that. Okay, and so higher education isn't just created. Higher education cannot make you smart. Education doesn't make you smart.
It provides a framework to where you could could expand, your ideas and
Right, but
horizons,
that's
but it doesn't force it on you.
well, and not only does it not force it on you, I don't have the power to make you smarter. I
Right.
can't raise your IQ. I can't. What I can do is stimulate your curiosity and then try to guide you to answers that to make the world make more sense to you. So it's not that I'm going to make you smart. Education isn't about being smarter. It's about understanding things better. Now, I mean, the purpose of education, now maybe that understanding leads you, as B suggested, to make more money or something like that. But I mean, there are plenty of us who went to college without any thought to what money it would make because we just wanted to understand the world better. We just did. And it is most useful for that. There's a kind of a false dichotomy, particularly in contemporary American political economy, between a college education and higher earnings. Historically, that was absolutely locked together. What a lot of people ignored, though, was how much of higher education was being pursued by people overwhelmingly from families who could afford it. Okay, well, if you can afford it, you're already likely to do well. Okay, but then we found that if we subsidized education for people who couldn't afford it, it could help them as well, that they might achieve more with their lives than would otherwise have been the case. Okay, that's why one of the real concerns about the cost of education that your generation is facing is, it's hard for you to understand until the bills come due how much you are paying for this education compared, for example, to what my generation paid for its education. And when you control for inflation, and that's the key, right? And you look at the money you really have to expend, or your families really have to expend, higher education has become grotesquely expensive for the American middle class and virtually unobtainable for anybody from the working class and below. Now, that was exactly the opposite of what we were intending beginning in the 1950s, both because it was better for the economy, but also it made us a more stable and resilient society. We know that the more education people have, the more tolerant they are. The more education people have, the more they can understand what's going on around them and contribute to that and know when it's time to do that. And so when you describe these institutions, tell me their nature, here's what they look like, driving on the right-hand side of the road and stopping at stop signs and traffic lights and all that. Here's why we do it: to prevent absolute chaos and destruction on the roads. Because we've learned over time, we can't trust the people's goodwill and good judgment when they're driving 2.5 tons at 65 miles an hour. It's more than we can ask. So does that make sense what I'm asking you to do with institutions? Here's what it looks like. And this is what Owen was doing. Give me its nature. That's important. But then try and explain to me why. How does this thing function? We know that all institutions are created, generally speaking, to do exactly what Owen suggested earlier, right? To give us a set of expectations of what we can expect from others, what they're likely to expect from us, and thereby reduce everyone's level of uncertainty, their level of anxiety, and enhance their ability to behave in predictable ways that stabilize the environment, okay? So every institution has that on some level. And that, I think, Owen, was what you meant when you were trying to talk about decorum in the classroom and things like that, was, the reason why I have a contract, implicit or otherwise, with students is because I can't just be imperial about this and just decide, okay, today we're gonna look at Mein Kampf. Well, so well, you didn't tell me that, man. Why? I mean, I can't just, okay, today we are Nazis. All right. Then no, it doesn't make sense. First of all, it doesn't have any pedagogical value. And it violates that assumption that you're not here to get marching orders from me. You're here to do what a couple of you suggested, to acquire this ability to kind of discipline your minds, focus your attention on things, and figure out why things are happening and what they mean. You can't do that. You won't do that without higher education. There is, in that sense, no such thing as common sense. That's one of the great myths of sort of folk culture is, well, I've got common sense. No, you haven't. If you had common sense, we wouldn't need law. Okay. I mean, really, this notion of common sense, it's one of those truisms for which there's very little validation. Okay. The more educated we are, the more we understand what we need to do and what we need not to do. One of the reasons why so many people are so easily deceived right now is because they maybe had some training in a specific task, but we're not a widely educated population. I mean, only about 30% of American adults are going to get a college degree. There's no critical mass of college educated Americans. And when you compare that to other European countries, that's cause for concern. But when you also look at how vulnerable so many of us have become to misinformation and disinformation and allegations of fake news and Russian meddling and all this kind of stuff, ultimately it's our responsibility. If you are, for example, if you're going to university, but you don't show up for classes and you don't do the assigned reading and you just kind of phone it in, first of all, save your money and get out. You don't want to be here, don't be here. But also, you're not learning anything. You're not being educated. Okay, you might remember a few things, but that's not education. That's conditioning. And that's not the same thing. You go into the military, I'm going to condition you. First, I'm going to break you down, then I'm going to build you back up as part of a unit. That's conditioning, and it's absolutely vital to command and control in the military. But the vast majority of Americans are never going to put on a uniform, in anger. They're just not. Okay, so there are very few reasons for just that controlled conditioning environment of, say, law enforcement or especially the military and things like that. That's a different world, and it's a tougher world in a lot of ways. And so it requires our ability to really stay focused in very specific ways that general civilian life simply doesn't require. Also, there's not a great incentive in the military to try and understand why things happen. The main thing is to know what you're supposed to do when they happen, whether you understand it or not. That's not what we demand of people as political citizens. It's time to vote or something. We want people to spend more time trying to figure out, well, why are some people supporting Trump or some people supporting Biden? Or, what does race have to do with this? What does, sex and gender have to do? In other words, why is this the way it is? That takes education. There is no substitute for that. None at all. Doesn't mean you can't be a perfectly nice person without education, but you will not understand things very well because we have to be taught. We have to be taught. So the challenge is, how do I get an education without just being propagandized? That's the expectations that are embedded in the institution of education, that you have a right and indeed an obligation to question the things that your professors say to you, not just to accept them blindly. Any professor who tries to get you to just say, look, there's one answer, it's mine, end of discussion. Unless you're in math, and even then it's dubious, I would call them out, because that's a violation of what I understand to be kind of the contractual bargain between professor and student. It's not a dictatorship. It doesn't work that way, okay? So again, for whatever kind of institution you're thinking about, what does it look like as part of an institution, designed to do all the things that Owen and others have said, reduce anxiety, give us expectations, recurring patterns that reassure us that this is the right thing to do, this is the thing we shouldn't do. And then we get into the specifics. Why did we create higher education that includes all those kinds of assumptions? Because we needed an educated population, both for stability, for integrity, and for the political economy, as B suggested. There are a lot of reasons. Now, I could strip that down into a couple of sentences. I would have nailed that question. So that's institutions. So we've done politics and we've done institutions. So far, are there any questions on either of those concepts? I know I'm kind of racing through these things, but this is review, and I just want to make sure that before you start to fade a little bit, I've covered all the main concepts.
I have a question about institutions real fast.
Mm-hmm.
From my understanding, are institutions given a sort of like legitimacy to them, like a legitimate authority to
Okay.
kind of educate us?
Well, let me see if I can tie in the next thing I was going to do, which is legitimacy and legitimate authority with institutions. Because you're right, Isabel, if what you're saying is the source of legitimacy typically an institution? Yes. Because when we think of legitimacy, what we're thinking of is that there is a general sense that someone is and ought to be in a position of authority. So legitimate authority means, okay, you are the president, or you are a police officer, or you are a professor in a college classroom. And you know what? We're going to treat you that way because it's clear to us that your presence there is legitimate. Okay. The institution vetted you. I'll use myself as an example because I've never been a police officer or a president. The institution says that in order for me to teach these classes and call myself an associate professor, I have to, first of all, I have to have what's called the terminal degree in the discipline, which sounds kind of ominous. It just means what's the highest degree you can get in the discipline. The highest degree in the discipline of political science is a doctorate, a PhD. Okay, so I got that. I couldn't have been hired for this job without that. You will, in community colleges, typically find people who have a master's degree. Okay, but A, they're typically not teaching upper division coursework. B, they're not dealing with graduate students. C, they're not granting 4-year degrees. So it's okay. And you can know a lot with a master's degree. Okay. In addition to that, though, I have to have shown evidence that verifies that I had a legitimate education. So I had to bring in all of my transcripts from undergraduate all the way up through PhD. I had to make available my dissertation, anything that people wanted to look at. I had to show them a record that I had earned what I had, that I could demonstrate. At various stages, I demonstrated skill and proficiency. That is, I had satisfied the obligations of other institutions that grant diplomas. Yeah, he did all the things he needs to do to get a BA. Yeah, he did all the things he needs to do to get a master's degree. Yeah, he did all the things he needs to do to get a PhD. Every one of those institutions that gave him that degree required that he comply with the guidelines of that institution. And therefore, you have more legitimacy, okay? If I was just standing on the street outside, none of you would be here right now. Or if I just tried to call you in your home and say, let me explain institutions to you, you would hang up on me. And everyone would expect that you would do that. Because we don't have any institutional precedent for that. There's nothing that gives you the idea that that's anything other than an intrusion into your private time, right? So you're not going to do it. But because, you or somebody, paid all the costs of this exorbitantly expensive education, you have a right to expect an education as a consequence of that. You come into the classroom with me. I kind of explain who I am. You also can look me up and you can know, okay, well, if you look in the catalog, it says for all the faculty members, this is when they graduated with their PhD, if they got a BA, MA, whatever they got, in other words, you can check on us. You or somebody can check on us. But in addition to that, the fact that faculty are reviewed routinely within their own programs. Every year we submit something called an FPAR. Okay, we have to justify the money they spent on us by telling them every single year, here's what I did with the last academic year. So there's all this stuff kind of going on under the hood that you don't see, but you have the confidence that something like that must be done until someone appears to do something that violates the expectations of the institution. So that, for example, if the next time, I'll stick with the Nancy example. Next time you log in here on Wednesday and I'm in full SS garb and you see a big swastika in the background and I say, now we will begin. And I start going on and spewing all this hate and anti-Semitism and all that kind of stuff. Well, let me just ask you, what's your reaction going to be? Are you going to see me with the same level of legitimacy that you did before?
Probably not.
Probably not.
Okay, why not?
That would, be sort of out of character.
Well, but again, this isn't about my personal character. I mean, this is more than just my personal character, right?
It would be out of the norm.
Well, it would be out of what you would be led to expect as normal for an institution of higher education in the United States in 2020. It's
Right.
not what you signed on for. So you're right. So it would be so abnormal that you'd think, well, either this guy's really elaborately pulling my chain and he's trying to make a point, or he's a psychopath. Let's see really quickly if we can figure out which, because I think I paid for this. And then what somebody might do, like say if I just was spewing racial bile or, anti-feminist bile or something like that, being abusive to women or men or anybody else,
That never happens.
what never happens?
I'm kidding.
Well, no, I'm saying it does have some point. I'm sorry, I had a little laugh there, you know. I was like, yeah, it happens all the time. It doesn't happen with me. But the thing is, if you even perceive that I'm doing that, okay, you're probably going to go to my, if you're smart, right? If you're committed to the integrity of the institution, you're not going to take that. You might ask me about it, but if you're concerned about approaching me because you think as a consequence of that, maybe this guy's going to affect my grade or something, you're going to go to my program chair. Or if you don't think you're going to get, a fair hearing there, you're going to go above them to the division director, who we now have instead of deans, because we don't have to pay them as much. And then from there, it might go to, the associate provost, might go to Jody Waters and, academic affairs. I mean, but there's a whole chain of accountability that you can appeal to. There's a formalized institutional process for grievances that would include things like, this guy is a hate spewing bigot. He's not teaching us. He's trying to indoctrinate us in this bizarre, cult of meanness or something. It's not going to stand. And I know a lot of you think, yeah, but there's one institution that protects you, Hughes, and it's called tenure. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. I can be fired for cause tomorrow, for cause. I can't. Tenure does not protect you in terms of cause. And I can tell you, especially at this institution, it doesn't. I've been here a long time, and I have seen, I don't want to, this is actually quite good by the standards of an institution. So I think that there is a sense that the oversight on professors is good here, but I have seen, I want to say for sure, I know of 4 tenured faculty, 3 of them professors, who were just shown the door. Unceremoniously booted, and they were all tenured. But they had all done something that might not have been that egregiously bad, but they violated the codes of conduct, the various kind of things, the various levels of oversight were infringed upon in ways that were not appropriate for a professor at a university. They're gone, okay, never to return. We've had other people who've been denied tenure, okay, because what happens when you're hired here is that you usually have a few years and kind of get your feet under you, and you're an untenured assistant professor. And then what you do is somewhere between, depending on how much you've taught before you got here, somewhere between 3 and 5 years downstream, you're going to be reviewed for promotion and tenure. Okay. And, I've sat on in fact, I've chaired the faculty personnel committee here. We have denied people tenure. We have denied people promotion because they simply did not meet the expectations of the institution. They didn't do the work. And if you're denied tenure in this field of work, you're pretty much finished. It's very hard to go to another institution and you start that 5-year clock all over again, or some fraction of it, because people, the first thing they're going to ask is, "Oh, I understand you were denied tenure here," as opposed to saying, "I didn't go for tenure there because I didn't like it there and I wanted to come here." But if you've been denied tenure, you're kind of dead person walking in this discipline. So, you don't know all that under the hood, but somehow most of you have reason to believe institutionally there's got to be accountability that keeps these people on something like the straight and narrow, okay? And so you have a right to expect that, but you always have a right, and I would suggest again emphatically, you have an obligation to the integrity of the institution. Don't just always yell about something, but if you really think systematically, man, this is not just his predisposition or her bias or whatever. This is like propaganda. This is conduct unbecoming what I think of as a legitimate educator. You have every right, and again, as I would say, obligation, to appeal to a supervisor and just say, hey, if nothing else, they might say, no, that's protected under academic freedom, which is another part of this institution. No one tells me how to teach. They don't dare. As long as I've been here, no one's ever, when they have tried, when I've stopped laughing, then I've looked at them and it's been like, nah, never mind. That's a stupid idea. Okay. That's academic freedom. And that's something we do fight for. Okay. And we've had to fight for it a few times. But that's important because you also need to know that I'm not taking my marching orders from the president of the college or one of the deans or, somebody anywhere. I'm teaching what I understand to be the most effective way I can come up with to help you understand the material. That's the bargain. Anything that intrudes upon it violates that. And so it undermines my legitimacy in your eyes. If I violate the institutional expectations, my legitimacy begins to erode. And it can erode to the point where people will grieve something, they'll complain, and I can be let go. So Isabel, does that help respond to your concern?
Yeah, it does. I was just, it was really interesting that the fact that legitimate authority is so important when it comes to like the stabilization of some institutions.
I would say of all institutions, particularly those that are public facing, where you're accountable to a public. If they don't see you as legitimate, they're much less likely to comply. They're much less likely to contribute where they need to and things like that. It's one of the things that's commonly overlooked when people talk about partisan polarization and things like that in the United States. One of the things that, again, this sort of talking decorative human beings in news, on television news at least, don't bother to tell you because they don't know, is that the most dramatic movement with respect to political parties in the United States is not toward the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. It's away from both parties, either to no party at all, which is the largest cohort, or to the Green Party or Constitutional Party or something like that. It's a small percentage. But see, that's important. In other words, we're not polarizing. We've lost faith in the legitimacy of the two parties. And so the legitimate authority that these private organizations would normally have, well, it's deeply embedded into the institution of elections itself, is not the kind of thing that disciplines the electorate the way parties are intended to do. In other words, if you're a Republican, you're supposed to listen to the Republican appeals, for what kind of policy we should have or what candidates we should vote for. But what we're seeing increasingly is people who are very suspicious of both political parties, with every reason to be, because in many ways, both political parties have they've kind of abdicated a lot of their responsibility toward the country. And then they've substituted that for doing pretty much whatever it takes just to get elected. And that's not the same thing as them listening to us. There are a lot of people who were registered Democrats from my generation who grew up with civil rights and the expectation of kind of progressive ideas, and they weren't really left-wing. They just like, come on, let's start being civil again. And one of those things was that we would have a kind of European style social safety net so that everyone's dignity would be protected, materially, which we know has substantive impacts on how their lives go. Well, the Democrats have abandoned that. They abandoned it back in the 1980s when they kept getting spanked in presidential elections, and they lost their status as a majority party. Well, ever since then, they've just been kind of fishing for ideas, and that's why the Democrats have no real coherent platform right now. Republicans, by contrast, have been much more effective at just narrowing the focus of what they're going to do and saying, this is what we're going to do. We'll find ways to get elected. But, they might soften the blow a little bit, but both parties have angered people who might normally have been traditionally part of their constituency because they don't look as legitimate as they once did. And so we don't trust them. Okay. So that notion of legitimate authority is the absolute key to the final concept I want to talk about, which is power. Okay. In power politics is not about forcing people to do anything, something that, the leadership in both political parties would do well to remember. It's your ability to achieve a desired outcome by persuading others that it's actually what they want as well. And the way that you can persuade people is to use the legitimate authority that you have to appear to them to be a good faith broker and say to them, make an appeal to them. Look, we need to raise taxes, or we need to lower taxes, right? Because if we lower taxes, a lot of the money and the physical plants that large corporations are sending overseas, those will come back home because we know they won't be taxed at as high a rate. And it'll be an incentive for them to come back, and then they'll create more jobs, right? Well, if you see that person as a legitimate authority, well, he or she knows they understand what they're saying. They understand enough about economics. They seem to me to be sincere. You know, they're backed and sponsored by all these other organizations and individuals that I see as legitimate. Okay, I'll buy it. But if you don't see that, if they look like they're lying or they're saying things that make it clear they don't understand what they're saying, they're going to be much less effective at being able to persuade you. If they are in a legal position to be able to make law, then they force you. You know, so if, for example, you know, some people are arguing that, and this is a perspective, I'm just saying, this is an example. When Barack Obama, in the last 14 months of his presidency, you know, found that he needed, or let's say the last year of his presidency, inside of that, you know, a justice passed away. And so a spot, as it does, opens up on the Supreme Court. Normally what happens is the president nominates someone, the Senate goes through a confirmation hearing, and then on a vote of the Senate, they either vote to confirm that justice or not, and then either we do or do not fill a gap on the Supreme Court, okay? The Republicans, for the first time in history, really, absolutely positively just said, no, we're not even gonna talk to this person. We're not gonna have any hearings. You know, we control the Justice Committee and things like that, and we're just not going to do it. We're not going to do it because no president, you know, in an election year should be able to appoint a Supreme Court justice. The people should speak. Then, lo and behold, 2020 comes along. Ruth Bader Ginsburg passes away, and the Republicans immediately, I mean, you know, she's not even in the ground yet, and they're talking about we're going to have a new justice and blah blah blah, and we're not 10 months out. We're a question of a few weeks out. And all of a sudden the same party that talked, and we've got them recorded, for example, saying that would be wrong. The American people should be allowed to speak. And all of a sudden they're saying, no, they shouldn't. They did speak. They elected Donald Trump president. Well, which is it? So the thing is, if you see the Republicans as legitimate, if you see the president as legitimate, you're going to agree with that, probably. You're going to say, well, yeah, I mean, I can see the logic, sure, because they're kind of on your side. You know, you get the feeling that I think they're honest brokers. I think they're fair dealers. I think they're right. They make a compelling case because this is only the president's first term, whereas, you know, Barack Obama was a lame duck, meaning he can't run again. That's completely different. We should have waited for the electorate. You know, you're going to buy that argument. But if you don't see them as legitimate, if you don't think that they're being honest brokers, you're not going to believe that. You're not going to be persuaded. So do you see where legitimate authority becomes really important in terms of your capacity to influence political outcomes? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yes.
this might be kind of redundant, but I guess what you're saying that like legitimate authority is sort of granted through institutions.
Yeah, it is the source of it. In other words, what we don't want in a modern political system is what some people refer to as a cult of personality. That is, look, it's not about that I obey the laws that the president is supposed to, or that the Senate is supposed to, or that, you know, I've demonstrated my expertise or anything else. You just like me. You're just impressed with me. You find me intoxicatingly persuasive. That's a cult of personality. That's the way dictators rule, typically. And the idea is they are stronger than the institutions, or at least they fancy themselves. They style themselves as being more relevant, more important, and more powerful than institutions. All right? That's what's sometimes called personal rule. Okay, and it's normally ascribed to developing countries that are fighting off collapse and things like that. For example, you know, Vladimir Putin would be an example partially of personal rule. That he has a kind of cult of personality. But what a lot of people don't understand about the Russian political system, it's a long history of monarchies and dictatorships. And so within Russia, there is a critical mass of people who have been conditioned to go over generations and generations to accept as legitimate that kind of authoritarian rule, okay? So Putin is not seen nearly as illegitimate inside Russia as he is outside Russia, and particularly in places like the United States. Our concern would be if our president started acting like Duterte in the Philippines, or Bolsonaro, or you know, or Putin, or somebody like that, where trying to suggest that his authority was more important than any of the institutions, and that the source of his power is the legitimacy he claims as almost divine right. In other words, I'm meant by God to be in this position. We did away with that a long time ago in most of the world. And we substituted for that these bureaucracies and impersonal institutions that could put a check on that kind of cult of personality, unbridled absolute power. And so, Owen, you're right. If you were to situate the key component of legitimate power in legitimate authority, as opposed to that kind of dictatorial cult of personality. So if you notice in the video, I argue, and you can be persuaded or not, but I argue that all of the things being more or less equal, someone who is relying on force is always politically weaker than someone who can rely on power. Because, in other words, if I had to slap you with a ruler to get you to read, as opposed to just trying to make the subject matter interesting enough that you might go ahead and look at it, then I would be weak as an instructor. Same thing with leadership. If I have to frighten you into complying, exclusively, if I have to rule by the barrel of a gun, it's a brittle regime that is in fact weak. It's fighting for its survival in a way that a legitimate regime doesn't have to, because it's already seen institutionally as supported. That is, the Supreme Court isn't going to get it. Look at the United States. You're not doing anything that the court deems unconstitutional. You're not being impeached. Even your partisan opposition concedes that you have a legitimate right to be there. That gives you a tremendous amount of political power. But if you fight that and you try to cultivate a cult of personality, what a lot of people don't understand is that's actually making you more vulnerable. You have to fight so much harder, and you have to squander all these extraordinary resources that the institution normally provides, simply, in this constant narrative of never mind what anybody else says, I'm in charge here. That's cult of personality. And that's not what the Republic was designed to do. That's clear from the people who were the architects of the Constitution, but also over 200 years of court precedent and everything else has been pushing against that. Jason, did you have a question?
Yeah, would a cult of personality, like an example of that would be when someone says, I alone can fix it?
Yes.
Okay.
It's an appeal to the same kind of thinking, where you set yourself in one of the things that we look at, for example, in a fascist regime, a modern industrial fascist regime, is what's called a maximum ruler. Okay, I don't want to go too far down this road because I get the sense that I'm stuffing enough in your brain right now, but this is an illustration of what Jason was talking about. Most fascist regimes really rely on that maximum ruler, and the purpose of the maximum ruler is physically to embody the power and the grandeur and the awesome authority of the state. I am the state. Okay, that is, no one but me can fix this. I am the ultimate source of right. Pretty soon it becomes I am the law. Okay, that's a cult of personality. That's a maximum ruler. And that kind of ruler is typically supported without elections, and where they are, they're just sham and at the barrel of a gun, with secret police and a militarized economy and very little, if any, protection of civil liberties, no civil rights to speak of, nothing but obligations on the citizenry to fit in as a little cell in the body politic. That's fascism. That's absolute fascism. Yeah. And we do not have that right now. We don't. But we have some of the predicates of it. And we're farther along that road than we were 4 years ago. None of these kinds of notions of justice and rule of law and all that, none of those things is carved in stone. They're only as strong as the institutions that embody and stabilize and perpetuate them. So if we undermine, for example, the authority of law enforcement, okay, either by just completely, disarming them so that they, in a violent society prone to violence, they can't even defend themselves, or if we militarize them and we condition them and train them to see us as adversaries to be conquered and controlled rather than citizens to be protected, we're undermining the legitimacy of the police. That's the concern about law enforcement right now. It's not about getting rid of the police. It's about restoring the sense of legitimate authority, so that when you see the police officer, your first reaction is, I'm going to pop a cap in that guy. Your first reaction is, you know what, I better slow down. I mean, this is his job. He's just showing up. He's reminding me, I still have that old school reaction. When I see a police officer, my first go-to is not, if you put your hands on me, I will light you up. My first reaction is, you're not going to put your hands on me. Everything's fine. What can I do for you? And that's usually the way the exchange goes. And it went that way when I was 20, you know, with one exception, which I won't talk about right now, but was great fun. But again, it's because I grew up with the idea, not that you just slavishly back down because you see a badge and a uniform, but because the vast majority of police officers with whom I had encounters with lots of them, really were trying to understand why I was doing what I was doing and do the right thing. That is, they were trying to keep the peace rather than trying to, you know, hurt me or something or conquer me. Does that make sense?
Does that go back to the notes on the Republic where it was talking about how you need an equal, I guess, distribution of power between the three different institutions?
Where did you see that?
The thing on Moodle, Plato's Republic, the notes.
Well, Plato's Republic is not dealing with, you know, a balance of power of any kind. That's a model for absolute authority. You're way ahead of where we need to be right now. But no, that's not like what we have with countervailing powers. And by the way, the American Republic is not designed to have three equal branches of government. They're not co-equal. That's a mistake. The idea is that built into those institutions of the courts, the legislature, and the executive branch are the capacity for countervailing oversight. Okay. In other words, only really the president can command us in war. Okay. And we know that presidents can prosecute war without the formal consent of Congress. War Powers Act notwithstanding, they can. If Congress does nothing to defund that war effort, the president will simply continue it, just as we did in Vietnam because of the Tonkin Gulf Resolution. Okay, so it's not, they're not, nor were they intended to be equal branches. I'll even go farther than that. A lot of people don't understand that the original architecture of the Republic did not necessarily specify, you know, the dispensation of power to the court to be able to declare law unconstitutional. That is a power the court took onto itself very early in the Republic, in a very famous case. Okay, the court decided it had the power to declare law unconstitutional, to engage in what's called judicial review. That's not mentioned in the Constitution. It's not mentioned anywhere in Article 3. None of it is. Okay, and so again, it's an institutional pattern that we've come to accept, but there's nothing codified in law that says it has to stay that way. You know, if we don't like the way the court rules, somebody taking control of the court, you know, just because of the happenstance of people having to die at the right time when your party's in the White House and controlling the Senate, could completely change the course of the Republic. That was never intended to be the case. Never. Okay. It's just that we've gotten used to it. But if it doesn't function, you watch. We're going to find a way to change it. Same thing with the Electoral College. It's clearly outlived its usefulness. Okay. Because it came from an era when one of the agreements with the majority of the framers was, we do not want the American people involved in anything but a sort of supportive way in who we choose to lead this republic. That decision is just simply too important. They're ignorant. They don't know what they're doing. They're well-intended and they got strong backs, but they don't understand. They just don't understand. John Jay, the first Supreme Court Justice in the United States, the people who own the country should run the country. That was a prevailing view certainly among the Federalists, who prevailed in the constitutional arguments. This was not supposed to be a democracy. It's not. That's by design. Okay, we were not supposed to be equal. That's by design. Right? A lot of things that we don't understand because the people teaching us often don't understand. There's a lot of noise there that we just don't pay attention to. So what I'm trying to do, without passing judgment on any of it, is say, let me throw these things out to you. Then you go back and you look at America's history, or you look at existing law, and you decide for yourselves. You're smart people. Now you've got a toolbox, right? Use these tools, take these things apart, see how they fit together, and then draw your conclusions. And then, you know, if that makes you want to vote, or it makes you want to vote a certain way, that's fine. If it makes you not want to vote, if it makes you want to overthrow the government, as long as it's not by violence, which is a federal crime, do what you want to do. I'm not interested in any of that, except as a spectator. I'm tired. I'm not going to go to the barricades anymore. I've already had my head kicked in. I'm not doing it anymore. You guys are on your own. Sorry. I'm tired. I'll make sandwiches for you, make some coffee. I'll do my best, but I'm not fighting for you anymore. I can't do it. But, I can be part of the drill team. We can do coordinated exercises with you. I can put Band-Aids on you when you get your head knocked in. There's all kinds of fun things you can do. All right. Does anybody have any other questions? That's pretty much the bulk of the assignment, really. I don't want you to worry about this thing. Sorry, I just stepped on somebody.
Could you provide just like one more example of like nature and function of an institution?
Yeah, sure. Okay, let's see. The nature of a municipal police force is to empower a trained body of men and women, to empower them with sufficient legitimate authority, sufficient legal guidance, sufficient training in both the dynamics of surviving on the street, but also in preserving the integrity of what they do against violations of law themselves, to go out on the street, to be visible either on foot or in vehicles or whatever, in order to help enforce the law. Okay? Law enforcement. That is what a police force kind of looks like. Now, its function is really important. That is, even in a society that values the individual, or at least claims it does, right, until the individual does something, embarrassing, we want people to feel like they can go out and make adult decisions and do the things they want to do and all that. But we know that sometimes they're going to lapse and they're going to make a mistake. And maybe they've had one more beer than they thought, or maybe they're a little angry when they get behind the wheel of a car. And so instead of looking when they get out, they just jet out into the street. They break the law. Okay. There has to be a way to mediate those encounters so that they don't escalate, so that they don't get out of hand. That has to happen, because without law enforcement, it happens all the time. As you will know, if you've ever been in a neighborhood, lived in a neighborhood where there functionally was no law, okay, people get hurt. It happens real fast, it's real serious, and sometimes people don't go home. The purpose of the police is to lower the likelihood that that kind of harm is going to be done to a community. So that's its function. In order to do that, there's an architecture of authority that is law enforcement. We've agreed that now it involves weapons and uniforms and all kinds of, Kevlar and, certain kinds of tactics and stuff like that. But ultimately, it's not supposed to be to create a private security force or, a localized army that sees citizens as wrongdoers who need to be disciplined, frightened, and punished. Because the job of law enforcement is not to punish us. That's adjudication. That's the courts that hand out the punishments. That's not the police officer's job, which is why people get frustrated when, say, somebody goes out with a little bit too much meth in their system and they move on a cop, and instead of doing what they're trained to do, what a guy my size used to be able to do when he was in shape, which is control someone and keep them from hurting anybody. Aikido is wonderful for that, by the way. You shoot them, because being a disturbance in public is not a capital crime. But if the police are shooting us, the claim goes, they violated both the nature and the function of the institution. That's not what they created for. That's not what they should be trained to do. And so we have to stop that, because the more the police shoot us, and they do about 1,000 times a year, the more they do that, the less legitimate we will see them. Because sooner or later, somebody we value, somebody we respect, somebody with whom we agree is going to catch a bullet from somebody with a badge. Okay, but long before that, many of us decide, no, we've got to fix this. The police didn't used to do that. I lived in really bad neighborhoods where the police almost never shot anybody. And indeed, most people in those neighborhoods back then never shot anybody. I mean, we didn't use guns. We just didn't. There were a lot of fights, and sometimes people get stabbed and stuff like that. But, the police were trained to take your weapons away from you. It's one of the reasons, for example, why there are sort of height requirements normally in police forces and stuff like that. That's not, any kind of pejorative discrimination. It's just that I can be, Bruce Lee, but, when in fighting shape, I'm 5'6", 135 pounds. That's not going to intimidate anybody. There are 10-year-old kids who they're just going to say, go ahead, man, do it. Then I have to use force because I don't have sufficient presence to be able to say, well, you guys got to stop this. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So now the challenge is going to be, when you do the assignment tomorrow, can you come up with examples I haven't used yet? Because there are obviously thousands of them, but that might be one of the things you want to think about. Anything else? Something from the notes, or maybe things I said in prior discussions, or things that where you thought, I thought I understood that, now I don't. There's no such thing, by the way, as a stupid question. All right, then you are pretty much on your own. You know the institutional expectations of you with respect to this assignment. Again, sometime between 7 in the morning and about 9 at night, you can start that thing. You got 2 hours to finish it. Once it's done, it's done. If something goes wrong, okay, and you get locked out of it or some goofy thing like that, don't panic. We'll make it work. Okay, it's the first time you're doing this. Sometimes things just go wrong. We're not building rockets here. We're not curing cancer. We're just trying to take exams, and that's okay. I just don't want people to worry. There's nothing productive that comes out of worry. Okay. There's always a way that we can manage these things. I don't think anybody's trying to get away with anything here. And as soon as I find out that you are, I will be hell for you, but only for you in a special kind of way. Everyone else will be able to avoid that. All right. Anything else? All right. Then other than that, I will see you here, presumably. I will see you on Wednesday. There should be somebody coming in, I think from Osberg, to talk to you about, remind you about voter registration, the deadline for which in Oregon is October 13th, if you want to vote in this election, and if you're eligible to do so and all that. I don't know who they're sending, but I got to remember when I drop in here on Wednesday to leave the first 5 minutes or so of that for them to do that. Otherwise, we will continue on with what one of your colleagues mentioned. We'll start looking at Plato's Republic and things like that. Okay? All right, well, have a good day, and I'll see you on Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.